Low it whistled in his ear, he who sat there in the crag, long his face as though a wooden carving of the Lord, with tumbling beard wild in the weather, and over long and freshly oiled hair, as written is within the scripture sacred, did Arthur mourn his loss of love, for in this moment he felt only hatred. Upon the moss-cloaked mount not far from hence, there stood the spires of Camelot, a place where once about the table round good friends had feasted heartily, but now the merry sounds were drowned, the castle's honour was beset by rot.
O Lancelot, how I do Loveless lust with fire and breast to slay thee. O Lancelot, in Camelot wast thou not he who should replace me, were I to fall in battle's dread. Then you should have taken up my stead. But now I sit and do not weep, for even what of mercy tender I did keep, you broke and callous made with loveless lust, by making of my home thine own, yet ere my passing from this coil, and now without what appetite my joys once bathed in, I toil and sigh, a king without his people's love. I am become a mockery. Thus spoke the king, alone and free, from courtly lies and porcelain faces. And when the bloody sun was soon to set, and cast his vicious arrows at the heads of those proud mountains not afar, all painting clouds like warriors' scars, King Arthur rose and took his branding caliburn, the blade that ran through stone and steel with but a turn of that dour lordling's mighty wrist. But not yet would King Arthur go toward that once so welcome glow to Camelot, where now yet glistened coal well wasted, where Guinevere like witches should have burned. Yet now with careless lordling of the lake she pranced in flowering fields of horses' wake. Not yet would Arthur venture to that tomb, a stone so called, the home of gloom. No, Arthur would go outward more, would press into the whistle low that issued from this hillock's mason crown, which he had set himself to climb, after his heart had been rent from his middle, and now was carried far on leathern's saddle, holding fast in both her arms her slaver and her saviour for but a little while. And all the while silent Arthur callous crept, with every murky, sluggard step toward whatever venture he might find, atop this hillock so like his own crowned brow, enclosed by tines of standing stones, a giant's dance, as that which Merlin once had brought, with wicked works from far away, to press the earth now for a grave over his father's head. Yes, long had been King Uther dead, and crushing so the heath beneath his wrinkled boot, the man who as a boy had been a marvel, alit upon a hillock's top, as thunder boomed in distant meadow. There stood 12 stones encircling wise, surround this dreadful warrior so dishonoured, and as he breathed a sigh without delight, the bloody clouds drew nigh and closed upon the height, and breathed themselves like loveless sighs, or as the heavy breaths of one dismayed. The clouds of coming night took on their mantle, which is oft thrown over the end of day, and as it is with twilight's welding spark, the fairies rose to have their way. In such an hour as this upon the fells, as Arthur found himself full wroth, his rubine cloak a banner on the wings of even's panting, he thought upon one whom long had been away from Camelot. His thoughts did whirl as did the clouds, his mind did heave as did his robe. He thought upon this hill of Merlin, who long ago had given warning word. And lo, what evil cunning work was this, for there amid the mason circle stood Merlin of a sudden still. His glinting eyes a world could fill, and, seeing him, grim Arthur gathered cold, apart within him feeling of a sudden old, that when he last had looked upon this foster father face he'd been a freshly married man. You wonder at my apparition, do you not, boy?
'Twas Merlin who the silence brake, and did so with a manner only one as he would dare to done, as when he spake to the great emperor of the Middle Earth,
Arturos Rex the nations roared, but aged Merlin, who this blessed man had raised in part, yet spoke to him as to a pup.
But 'tis not me, as when in body I did walk, as when the flesh of your forebear I wore. I am now no more than the Barrow-wights, a spirit fallen from the ancient shore, of guarding, like the master of a monkish school, the children of the Trojan Brutus that claimed these ancient moors, like Joshua of old, from Eton's seven-fingered, seven-toed.
"What will you?" shouted Arthur with a shudder. "What will you, spectre of those cursed days, in which with heart so full of love I wedded Guinevere, whom I thought surely was a dove?"
You know full well the warning words with which I would have wended well your will, so ardently aflame. Did I not say that she had ears for Frankish words, for the sweet swooning of the lordling of the lake? But not to pour out salt upon your wounds have I come to you on this night.
"Wherefore then, spectre, speak," the king declared.
And why would this fallen god called Merlin otherwise? It was his wont to speak, sometimes more than ear could bear to hear, as when in Vortigern's great bastion, by mouth of young Aurelius had fortunes told.
I come to finally fulfill my dreadful purpose, then be still,
said Merlin's ghost.
"What purpose this that dreadful is, so much that it will keep you from death's kiss?"
Bade Arthur know.
A kiss,
said Merlin.
You may call it so, whose soul goes westering with setting sun into the bosom whence all promise flows, into the keeping of truly the once and future king. But that is not my fate, I do fear. Therefore, boy, dare not remind me, while I am near, of death. You have not seen his bony face as I, Abaddon, which in endless hunger cries. For of all the mortal seed of ours, though in truth too few, for him too many be in Jesu power.
"For truth then, Merlin, it repenteth me, whatever British power you may be. I ask you what your dreadful purpose is,"
said Arthur. "And now, for yes, I know that you who listen see what shall happen next. This is the power of a spoken text, to waken eyes that in the hearts of men have fallen far too deep into a death-like state of sleep. And now the sun went westering and set, its violent fires quenched by briny deep. Above the henge atop the hill, from where the world below seemed still, the clouds that gave the night its lack of shape drew back and caused the owls amid the forests there to wake, like curtain letting out a little light from deep within the home of heaven's height. A pale dimness greyly settled in the world, and Arthur's courage threatened then to fold. For lo, what monstrous foul and wicked shape did Merlin's fallen spirit take upon itself in this half-light? He stood there in the middle of the circling stone, and bore above his brow broad antlers of a heart, not as a crown, but grown steadfast unto the bone that would have held the brains of meaty he had been, and slender, tall, his eyes red shone. This was, as many long had known, a devil's son, a fallen one, which in the speech of Hebrews are called Nephilim. And there spoke Merlin, in his burning eyes a hellish gleam, his form more shadow, perhaps part dream.
I come to tell you, Emperor of the Western world, that you are mortal, and that all you hope to do, all great deeds, all fell fights, all things built, what you bring forth by love at night, with wicked and with well-thought women, will all fade, will all die. Whatever towers you shall raise, to reach into the sky, upon the morrow on the meadows they shall lie. If brickwork skulls they would have been, their brainy contents would have dashed across the green. But there is more that with you I must share. Indeed, I planted long ago that sword of youth within the stone, the sword that makes of orphans kings, the sword that ruined Britain was. And this was but a shadow of a sword to come, which mark and bone and steel and stone could cleave in twain as keen as logic of the angels sane. This was all a splendid thing, you surely thought, dread king. But to we, who stalked these fairy glens of ancient times. It astounded us none. It was to us a bit of fun, much as the fun the Lady of the Lake had with my carnal slave, Aurelius, an orphan son. She lured me by him into stony grave. But to the point,
said Merlin, like the sounding of a horn. And in the mountains above Camelot a storm drew in and cast its darts like javelins about. The drizzle of the heavy clouds began to patter on the mud.
What is the point?
Bade Arthur know.
The point is that our plan be nearly fully grown. You are as a fruit well ripening, and then, when you have reached the fullness of your flower, you of all the highest of your power will be disarmed against thy will. By means of battle skill, the hand of haunted Mordred shall it be. Thine and thy sister's son is he, who sickly is and bent, though not in strength of arms, but might of mind, his malady abides. He shall take from thee thine branding blade, which of the veins of fallen stars is made, of fallen powers that in heaven lost the war, and were swept down to earthen floor.
Then, as though this word to mark, a star from heaven did depart, and flashed like fire's green a moment long. Then it was gone again, beyond the clouds, and so it was that Arthur King looked down upon his Caliburn bright. This was that second sword which he, after the sword and stone did break, received from Lady of the Lake, which raised both fair and foul dour Lancelot de Lac, who hence from Frankish father Ban was spirited away as child to fairyland, to Avalon that lies awaiting in the west, like Abaddon claiming to be some mortal's rest. Yet more akin to Abraham's kind breast is this highly regarded roost. From that fair land of healing water wells, this star-forged tongue of dancing fire was brought, and to the British people's shores, a tongue that spoke only in blood, and yet was laid in kingly hand, for that the peace to keep. This blade was power of the law. It was the word that long before the ageless elements began their work, carved out the shape of all the rivers in this middle earth, so that the waters would know where to flow, as blood in veins that keeps a body whole. This blade was nature's law itself, and so by might of man corrupt, this power bright and hand so light to hold and sweep away the enemy, could only lead to breaking of the law, a law that by the hand of fallen man undid itself. And so the tapestry of nature all affray would fade away one day, as do with morning light the stars. Thus Arthur thought and knew within his heart that whilst the web of nature's law still was, his was the duty not to tatter and to trim the world into his own desires frame. But he was greater and yet lesser than all ordinary men. Duty was all that he was. No room was left for petty personal revenge.
I see,
the King of Britons then began.
Methinks I see the sense within your words. Too oft and easily have I been stirred, not by the need or weakness of those I claim to love, but by the lusts of mine own heart, which evil were from youthful start. Ever where I a fruit did see that hung like tempter's power from a tree, I did not keep myself from it, but ate it whole. And now, if justice must me hit, then so be it. But Merlin, having seen thy form uncovered, I now know your words I must resist. For if by what sword and stone your cunning work was wrought, and this was only but a shadow of the truth, this sword, which came through water and the word, shall surely not be bound by such a bitter goblin as thyself. I shall not suffer Mordred's talon on this hilt, but I shall die, and at the margin of the world shall ask my messenger to cast this brand like good news back into the lake, the water whence I once did take the blade with thee at mine own side, and when 'tis done I shall abide in Avalon the setting sun, until the rising of the one who more than I is called the once and future king, of whom I am but shadow.
These were the words of Arthur bold, upon the weathered hillock's crown, to Merlin's sleepless spirit, and when this fallen power saw that Arthur's mind would bend no more, just as it was with Guinevere before,
He turned his fiercely gleaming eyes like orbs of hatred unto Camelot. There upon the bulwarks' towers, long a while that nightmare gaze dwelt and brooded like the showers and the twirling vapours of the clouds. Lightnings ever and anon still smote like smithing hammer on the hills, rending here or there a tree, as though telling of the doom of Arthur, as he waged a war against the powers that are aged so old that they all knew and trembled at the thought of Caliburn, which forged was in the time before, at the very roots of day, where the hills that as the pillars of the heavens make their stand began to grow. For there is nothing quite so rare, nor just as frightening, as is a truly righteous king.
Arcturus Rex in terra